you unmute when I call you.
Are now live.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee of Isle of Wight Council. My name is Andrew Garrett. I'm councillor. I'm chair of the committee. The other committee members who are currently present are Councillors Debbie Andre, Vanessa Churchman, Richard Hollis, Michael Lilly, Michael Merwell, Chris Quirk. And joining us by invitation, because he is the chairman of the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Neighbourhoods and Regeneration and part of the scrutiny function, is Councillor Michael Best. And Councillor Churchman is also chair of the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Children's Services, Education and Skills, so we'll be wearing sort of two hats this afternoon. Unfortunately, Councillor Nicholson, John Nicholson, chairman of the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Health and Social Care, has had to send his apologies. Other members of the council are present, and if they wish to take part, they can at my discretion, and I hope to be able to take them. There are, of course, many officers present in this meeting as well, and supporting me are Ms Megan Tuckwell, who is Democratic Services Officer, and Mr Paul Thistlewood, who is the Scrutiny Officer. I hope also there are a good number of members of the public who are watching in, and I hope that you will find this is an interesting and informative meeting. A little piece of housekeeping. The reason that we can do this meeting in a virtual environment is that there is new legislation in place which allows this. To everybody who is a participant to this meeting, if you haven't already, please do switch your mobile phone off, or at least to silent during the meeting. Because of the nature of this technology, there's always a little bit of a pause between one person finishing speaking and the other person then speaking. Part of that is the process of muting and unmuting, so do be aware of that. For all those who are participants, please only speak when I ask you to do so. So a lot of it will come through me, which of course will mean that the meeting will take a little bit longer, but hopefully will still help us conduct the business smoothly. And for those who are not members of the committee and therefore have their videos off whilst they're not speaking, do indeed switch your video back on when you are speaking. So, yes, Councillor Hastings, you wish to raise an apology or a query about apologies. May I call you, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just I've just received a message from Councillor Hobart, who is trying to get into the system, but he's having a problem, so he's just apologising at the moment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hastings.
You are welcome.
So before I move to the formal business of the meeting, I think it's worth us, of course, reminding ourselves the context of why we are meeting virtually and therefore the business that is before us today. We are meeting, of course, at a time still of crisis. We are still in the emergency period of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm sure we'll have in mind that context that we are. I'm just pausing there because my screen has done something strange and an image has come up. That's okay. That may happen from time to time where I will have to pause, just because we're obviously familiarising ourselves with the technology. As I was saying, we're meeting at a time of crisis. We are still in the emergency period, and I am sure we'll all have in mind, as we discuss things, just the appalling effects this has had on all of us, but particularly those who have lost loved ones, both on the island, in the UK, and indeed across the world, such as the interconnectivity of our world, that many of us have family and friends overseas as well. Can I also say on behalf of my committee colleagues that we absolutely would want to recognise everything that the staff of the council has done over the last few weeks to respond to this crisis. More will be said in other times and in other places, but those staff, you have stepped up marvellously, wonderfully. You've been exemplary to the spirit of public service, and I would have expected nothing else, but it is wonderful to see that happen. And of course, to all those volunteers, the key workers, everybody who's played some part in all of this, even if it has just been the passive one, it feels, of staying at home, staying alert. Okay, so I shall now move to the formal business of the meeting. My first agenda item is the minutes of the last meeting. I was not present for that meeting, but I would invite colleagues who were present, if you could indicate in the chat bar. If you have any issues relating to the accuracy of those minutes. I'll give it about 10 seconds for people to do that because of the necessary delay. Apparently I'm sharing my screen somehow. So I've not seen anything in the chat bar to say that that there is out, but I will still proceed with the meeting and attempt to get that sorted out. So perhaps, Simon, you'll be able to help me with that. Otherwise, I'm now going to sign the minutes. It's assigned. So what is happening is that I seem to have a multiple share of my screen. Hopefully that will sort itself at the time. I'll ask Simon, who is off screen, if he is able to sort that out for me, but I will proceed with the business. Colleagues, members of the committee, is there any of you who has an interest to declare? Please indicate in the chat bar if you do. I'll wait about 10 seconds for you to do that. Whilst I'm waiting, I'll explain to any members of the public who may be wondering, what is this chat bar? This is something that those who are participants in the meeting are able to put a short note, usually to indicate that they wish to speak. No colleague has indicated that they wish to declare an interest. I now have Councillor Tyndall, who has now been able to arrive to our meeting, and he is declaring an interest as the chairman of the Audit Committee. No other declarations of interest, so we can move on to the third item, would be for public question time. We are still able to take public questions, and there have, I have been advised by the clerk, been no public questions. That's confirmed. Thank you. So bear with me, everyone who's watching. There's a middle icon that I need to press. Do you want to? I can step away whilst somebody does that for me.
No, you don't have the icon. Okay. It's only the participants that can see that. It's not public.
Okay. It appears that I don't have the necessary icon to cause my screen to behave properly, so my apologies for that. So we now move to item 4 of the meeting's business. We have a much slimmer agenda than usual because of the crisis that we face, and item 4 deals with the Isle of Wight Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The 5th item of our business also includes an item to Cabinet on the response and recovery planning, and
I seem to have lost you, Gandry.
It's Paul Thistle with the scrutiny officer here. The chairman's just having a problem with his IT equipment and just reconnecting.
I'm rejoining that.
Right, the chairman's just switching to another machine. It will just be a couple minutes, members. Members, it's Paul Thiswood here. Can you still hear me, the members of the committee, and any other participants? Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we seem to have lost connectivity at County Hall at the moment, and we're just rebooting the system. So if everyone would just hold on, we'll just adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. Yeah. Can Michael, as the Vice Chair, formally adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes while we sort this out?
So is he doing
that? At County Hall, can you raise your hand if that message? Yeah, you have Debbie, you have Chris, you have Brian, Vanessa, Richard, Michael, got that? Okay, we're going to adjourn for 5 minutes. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is leave. I think I'm back in, but I'm going to. I'm going to put myself on mute, and I'm just going to slightly slide out of view whilst I do this. So where are we at the moment? We're just about to start the.
I'll just put it in the chat so that people know that the meeting has been adjourned for 5 minutes. So we're just going into your item 4. Unshare
I'm fine. I'm back now in the system.
I think Aries is fine.
And you are live again, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon, for confirming that. So we think we have diagnosed the technical issue that was causing the system to be overloaded here in terms of our Wi-Fi connection, but hopefully that won't happen again. If it does happen again, what will happen is the Vice Chair, Councillor Lilly, will do as he did before to take over the running of the meeting. And I would say, if it does happen again, we may seek to adjourn, but it may be, if possible, if there's no other reason, then Michael Lilly, Councillor Lilly, would continue in the chair until I would be back on stream. So because we've given a 5-minute adjournment, I will wait 2 more minutes for that to elapse, because some people may have left the virtual meeting. So by my timepiece here, the 5 minutes has now elapsed, so the meeting is now back in session. I'm hoping that you are all hearing me fine. I'm sure if you are not, I have got thumbs up on the screen, so that is great. So we had just reached the point in the agenda where we would be discussing the papers on the COVID response and the recovery. I just explained that we would take the 2 papers in a kind of seamless discussion, though of course they are 2 separate items and we'll be making recommendations towards the end separately. I should explain that the committee met informally last week to collate a number of questions, about 50, that we've already put to the Chief Executive over the weekend and the early part of this week. He and officers have responded.
Members, I'm afraid, it's Paul Thistlewood here, the scrutiny officer. I'm afraid that Andrew's lost connection again. He's changing technology back again. So for the while, can Michael Lilly, as Vice Chairman, step into the breach, please?
Yes, happy to do that, Paul. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Good, brilliant. I'm not sure whether, because we were starting the report, whether the Chief Executive wishes to open this item as it's his report. I'm not sure if you're there, John. John, I think you're coming up. Can you unmute and perhaps just open this item up? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Clearly, there's an awful lot in the report and an awful lot in the questions that you asked us at the end of last week, which we provided answers to. I think perhaps only a few words of introduction to help with the report. What I'd like to say to start with is that it's important for members to recognise that we are very much still in the response phase of the pandemic. We've got an awful lot of activity that is still going on to both respond to the challenges that are in front of us, to respond to how the government are wanting to respond nationally to the pandemic, and therefore how we translate that into local action. So we've got an awful lot of our members of staff that are currently working in the response phase, whilst at the same time we still have to have an eye to recovery and what comes next. So I think in total we've been responding for about 85 days now since the country really started to get to grips with the pandemic and really started to put activity in place to try and slow down the spread of the virus. We've been driven in terms of some of our thinking and our planning by what's known as the reasonable worst case scenario. So effectively, with information provided from Public Health England and provided from the government on the now well known and well talked about R figure, we've had to constantly reevaluate the worst case scenario to plan for and to respond to for the Isle of Wight, but as part of the Local Resilience Forum. So originally, when we started out, the reasonable worst case scenario was based around an R figure of something like 3.43. And at the moment, the R figure for the Southeast is down at about 0.95, 0.97, something in that sort of order. So all the time, we're having to reevaluate our plans and change our plans to bring those things into account. Throughout that whole period, our whole focus has been on how do we protect the community in the best possible way. How do we keep them safe, and at the same time, how do we slow down and manage the spread of the virus? And we've done an awful lot around communications, around campaigns, working with our most vulnerable groups, and working with our whole community, in fact, in order to be able to try and protect our community. In doing that, we've also engaged very well with lots of community hubs that have been established to protect local community groups, and I have to say the response of the whole community has been absolutely amazing. They've been very easy to work with, and we've been able to actually facilitate lots of work in communities rather than actually have to take a direct role in supporting and managing those particular community groups. At the same time, I think we've had a wonderful response from our staff. You know, many who are in direct job roles directly related to responding to COVID have had to really go the extra mile and work really hard in terms of protecting the most vulnerable in our community and doing the very best they can at all times. Many others, where we've redeployed staff onto the front line, have willingly offered to take up roles and have gone right into the front line to help out, whether that's in caring for people, in social care, or in other areas, you know, delivering food parcels, supporting the community, sorting out medications, all those sorts of great activities. And as I said, we are still very much in that mode where we have a number of staff who are redeployed doing lots and lots of work to keep the community protected. I think one of our challenges is that this has been a fast moving and dynamic situation. So as we've received information and guidance from government, either directly from government or via the Local Resilience Forum, we've had to change our plans and shape our plans and do things in response. And that still very much is the case, where government are very often issuing pieces of guidance, perhaps late in the day as things have changed, that they want things to change quickly. And then we've had to play, not catch up, but then we've had to respond the following day with, well, how are we going to implement that locally for the island and make the difference for the island and change our plans to accommodate the changing national picture as well. So I think, you know, really dynamic situation. We've had to work through a dynamic situation. We've had to work really hard, and we have to stay on top of that situation at all times, and we continue to do so. We've given you a flavour of pretty much everything that's been going on for the last 12 weeks, I think it is, in the paper that we've drafted. We've tried to set out, you know, what the issue is, what we've done in response, what's currently ongoing, but there's still an awful lot that's going on in terms of response. And of course, the very fact that we're having a virtual meeting today sets out the fact that, you know, we are operating in different times, and we'll need to find ways of operating in different times. And I'm grateful for the members' forbearance with some of the technical difficulties we had at the start of the meeting, but hopefully that won't continue for the rest of today's meeting. Chairman, I don't want to say an awful lot more. There's an awful lot in there, and I'm sure members want to ask a lot of questions of officers and members about, you know, what the content of the paper is. So thank you for that.
I've regained connection, so hopefully Michael is hearing me, and that I've been able to retake the chair.
Thank you.
So thank you to the Chief Executive for those opening remarks. So colleagues, the way I would like to take this is effectively in 3 parts. The first part will be to look at paragraphs up to paragraph 75 of the report to Scrutiny Committee, the response phase paper. That looks at all the responses, everything neighbourhood services, social care, those sorts of things. And then the second part to look at the financial and budget implications side of things. And then the third part would be specifically to look at the recovery plan. And that will be a point when I will invite the leader of the council to comment specifically on that paper. So the priority I'm going to give on this is to give is for questions from members of the committee first, and take those on any matter on that response side of things. And colleagues, you will know that the way to indicate it that you wish to speak is to type in the chat bar. If you do not have a chat bar, then to wave in the screen. And I will be alerted to call you. So who would like to open the questions? Obviously, we have asked the Chief Executive a lot of questions, and if I had frozen at the time when I was explaining that we will be collating and cataloguing all of these for a report to our July meeting of this committee. So I will take Councillor Richard Hollis and then Councillor Michael Lilly after him.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question. I was referring to paragraph 31. My question is, what happens to businesses who cannot start up again? For example, a cafe where they may not be able to in the nature of their business, socially distance. Is the finance available for them? Will the council be getting more finance from the government for people like that?
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. So I'll direct that back to the Chief Executive, but Chief Executive, you may want to then direct it to another colleague or indeed a cabinet member. So let me know and I will then call them.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I think I can take that one. At the moment, the only government support that is available is the government support that's set out in the paper. So a cafe of the sort you're talking about, Councillor Hollis, might be eligible for funding under the current discretionary fund, which is the most likely. It would need to make an application, but the maximum funding it could achieve would be probably £10,000 for a small cafe, up to £25,000 for a larger cafe. But the criteria around the discretionary fund are very clearly set from government, and there are no further, as I say, there are no further funds that we're aware of at the moment that would come from government. There is some support available from the Local Enterprise Partnership, but most of that is a loan fund at the moment.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Hollis, do you wish to ask anything supplementary to that? Otherwise, I'll call Councillor Lilly. No. So, Councillor Lilly, if you would like to put your first question.
Yes. You actually, I do thank you, John, for raising the issue of the involvement of. I particularly want to know what lessons have been learned from this grassroots involvement. We know there were 27 community hubs spread across the island. We know that many other organisations like faith groups, community and voluntary groups, also with these town and parish councils and local grassroots groups and voluntary groups in the post-COVID recovery planning. So I want to know lessons learned and how they're going to be involved in the future.
Thank you, Chairman. I think for the benefit of those listening, Councillor Lilly, you broke up ever slightly, but I think you were reflecting on the positive work done in the community groups and faith groups and the town and parish councils and how we can harness that going forward. I think from my perspective at the moment, as I said in the introduction, we are still in response phase, so we've not yet had the opportunity to, if you like, document all of the lessons that have been learned. We have seen an immense community support. I think we've always talked about that as being one of the island's great strengths. And I think on that basis, there's an awful lot that we can do to build in that community support as we go forward through the recovery phase. We're not yet at that point of doing so, but it is something that we will take into account as we develop our processes and our approach to the community. I think one of the lessons that is being talked about nationally is how very strong community support is, and therefore how do you harness it and collect it and make it work for the community over the longer term.
Thank you, Dad.
So, Councillor Lilly, I think we may have.
Andrew's still there. Okay, can I take over then as chair and say, is there anyone else wish to put a question?
So, Councillor Quirk?
Yeah.
I got Chris Quirk.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chris,
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'd like to ask, in terms of the coming out of this issue, we're likely to have to use a significant amount of the council's reserves. I would like an opinion on that.
So,
did you get that?
Yes, sorry, Chairman, I was trying to switch my camera on. I think the Chairman indicated he would like to sort of speak about financial bit later on in the meeting, but I'm happy to make a comment now if you would like, Councillor Lilly.
Yes, as we've had that question.
Okay. Well, I know Chris Ward is also in the meeting and may wish to add a further comment. But as we've set out in the report, our initial view is that we're able to produce a strategic recovery plan without the use of our general reserves, which we've clearly built up over a number of years. But our working reserve is about just over the £10 million, but we need to keep a minimum level of 7 million before we need to think about a Section 114 position. So I think, as we've set out in the paper, we think there is the potential that we can cover that financial issue, but we will need to obviously review as we go and keep a very close eye on our spend. But I would suggest, Chairman, you might ask Councillor Chris Ward to make a further comment on that.
Chris, if you're there in the ether, can you come forward and add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Nice
Chris?
to see you all.
Yeah, nice to see you, Chris.
I know not on camera, but yeah, I obviously concur with what the Chief Executive has said. It's actually vitally important that the Council doesn't dip below its minimum level of reserves, because, as the Chief Executive has said, that's when the Council does enter Section 114 territory. It's also important that we keep a reasonable amount of headroom as well, because our financial forecast, particularly in this uncertain time, could move around. As we've mentioned in the paper, we don't know what the duration of this emergency will take. We don't know the extent to which there might be any further funding from central government. So we really are in quite an uncertain position. So having a plan that doesn't rely on general reserves and keeps those intact with that degree of headroom is actually very, very important to keep the Council on the right side, if you like, of its budget, and not to have to consider something really quite drastic as a Section 114 notice. Thank you.
Thank you. hopefully, Chris, that has given you some answer. I've got Michael Merwell. Michael, you wish to ask a question? Michael, you need to unmute. Huh? Can you unmute, Michael? If I can do it here. Michael, you need to unmute. Can you unmute, Michael? Oh, hold on.
Maybe take a question from elsewhere, Chairman, and maybe Councillor Merwell can come back at a later date.
Thank you very much, Simon. Are there any other questions? Do you have a question?
Councillor Merwell appears to have his microphone live now.
Okay, Michael, back to you.
Thank you, Michael.
Can you have your, would you like your question?
It takes about 10 seconds to unmute for some reason. It's a bit like my brain. Just going back to the lessons learned, I think for any project or anything like this, it's a critical document that needs to be written, but also written at the time that it happens. Because if we do, I know everyone's busy, but if we do wait until 3 or 4 months' time, people will forget what happened and what was done to rectify it. So I think it's very key, one, that there's one person who's responsible for it, and they will be the owner of the lessons learned document, and everyone should go to that person with what went wrong and what was done to rectify it, without the issue of people being frightened or saying, you know, we messed up, but when it wasn't an error, but it was just something that was unexpected. So next time it happens, it's anticipated and we know what to do straight away. So I think that's why a lessons learned document should be a living document that isn't written in 3 months' time. It starts now and carries on. So I don't know whether John Metcalfe can reply on that.
John, would you like to comment on Michael Merwell's statement?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and I wouldn't disagree with anything that Councillor Merwell has said. So as we have progressed through our response to the pandemic and the things that we've done through our silver cell, which has managed the response, we've kept records of conversations, of decisions, so we understand, you know, why we did stuff and why we did things. So all of that will feed into a post-event review when we get to that particular point in time. So I think I understand what you're saying about lessons learned as we've gone along, but I think we are documenting as we've gone along, and therefore we've got that documentation to be able to go back over when the time is right.
Thank you. Anyone else for the committee at this point would like to ask questions? Debbie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I hear what the Section 151 officer says, but I'm looking at item 79, page B15 on our corporate scrutiny papers, where it says it remains unclear whether there will be further funding allocated. We currently have just under a the prediction is that we will have a 9.8 million shortfall. Bearing in mind this deficit, how can we be sure that any underspend of government funding is allocated in the right places as capital spend, not used to address revenue deficit? And also, can we use this as more evidence to go to government for our island deal? Thank you.
John, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Chairman. I think I will defer to Mr. Ward on that particular item, because I think there are a couple of things that Councillor Andre's juxtaposed, which I think it would be helpful for Mr. Ward to unpack. Chris?
Chris, would you like to come in there?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Andre. I think there's a few things around that. You're absolutely right. The position is uncertain at this stage, and our best forecast, obviously based on a number of assumptions, not least that there will not be a second wave, for example, is that our forecast shortfall is around about the £10 million mark. As I mentioned earlier, we are not clear whether there will be further funding from government. We do continue to prepare and submit a monthly return to government, and this happens across the local government sector. So every council in the country is preparing a return to MHCLG on a monthly basis to let the government know what the overall position is. The latest, and I have to say this is from a government official as opposed to a minister, but the latest the latest letter that we've received, and which is referenced in the answers to the questions, is that the government have provided local government so far with £3.2 billion worth of funding, and the actual cost to date, so it's only for the period up until the end of May, and I hasten to add that that's actual expenditure to the end of May, not a forecast to the end of the year. And obviously, as we will know, that there will be ongoing costs associated with this from here on in, and a tail to, for example, potential losses of income. But the government have said that the spend so far is 1.25 billion. So on that basis, they are at this stage not minded to allocate any further funding, but they will obviously keep a watchful eye on the overall position. Now, that's not to say that they are committing to providing further funding, but they are watching the position closely. I'd be surprised, your question regarding underspends, if that's at the governmental level, I think I'd be surprised if the government had an overall budget underspend in the current year, given the extent to which they have distributed funds already. If it's the council's overall position in terms of underspend, then clearly that could form part of any strategy for the council to seek to remedy the £10 million shortfall that it has. In terms of the island deal, I think it's incumbent on us all to continue to press for the island deal. We've heard from government in the year that what we described as the fair funding review will be delayed again, so it won't be part of next year's financial settlement. Now, it was always our anticipation that the financial funding associated with the island deal would come through that fair funding review. So we know that, as of today anyway, that the £2.5 million that we were anticipating as a minimum to come through from the island deal will not be received. And therefore we will have a budget challenge going forward, but all the more reason, in my view, that the council needs to maintain its reserves at these levels or at higher levels in order to be able to smooth the impact of that out over a longer period until such time as that island deal does come to fruition. If I have missed any of your questions, Councillor Andre, then please feel free to supplement.
Okay, that's
If I, sorry, if I,
do you come in on the supplement?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yes, thank you for that detailed explanation. Just to clarify, I was actually referring to our council, our local authority underspend, because what concerns me is that as I say, that funding is going to go into sort of revenue replacement, and inevitably we know that some services will have, we will have to review what services come out of that. But just to clarify, but it's good to hear that we still are pursuing with the island deal. Unfortunate, as you say, that we would get that through the fair funding deal, but I'd just like to point out that obviously the amount for the island deal that has been evidenced is nearer 6.5 million, not 2.5. But thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. I got Councillor Stewart would like to be invited to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and hello, committee, and hello, people that are looking in. I think it's a useful question which Councillor Andre has asked, and it will probably help to inform on some of the actions we're taking going forward. I have today confirmed with our MP a letter which is going to the Minister, specifically relating to our financial position. I'm grateful to our financial officer for summarising the key points, including the island deal, and that is one of the items that will be in that letter, and it will be published publicly tomorrow, and so people will see that we are not only dealing with the current situation, but we are planning ahead for the future. And all I can say in regard to the reserves, I think, is how grateful I am to my colleagues on the Cabinet and to others who have helped to secure a robust reserve position, which might otherwise have meant we were in a very difficult place. And I think we will need to continue with that strategy in order to keep the island safe. Happy to take any other questions, Chair.
Andrew,
thank you,
taking over.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I'm hoping you can hear me, Vice Chair, and that I'm now back safely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I switched to a different Wi-Fi connection, which should be more stable than the one that seemed to have been dropping out here. So, Councillor Lilly, you had actually said you had a question. So, can I bring you back in for that question?
Yes, my question really is to do with the two parts. One is about the second wave, as this was actually raised, because it's very clear in the report that, in a sense, the A plan is that there isn't a second wave and that our finances are connected to that. Scientific evidence is now sort of indicating that we could have a second wave, and I want to know what the council is doing regarding the financial and the sort of human health risk to the island in planning, having a kind of B plan in the event of a second wave, and how would we deal with that financially and also from a health perspective.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I know that the Director of Public Health is in this meeting, so Chief Executive, I think it might be appropriate, if unless you think otherwise, for me to put that to.
I think entirely appropriate for Mr. Bryant to talk about the second wave, Chair, and then I can talk about any plans that we may have for it.
That's great. So I'll take Mr. Bryant first, our Director of Public Health, and then I'll call you Chief Executive. Mr. Bryant.
Good evening, many thanks. Yes, the second wave, through our work we are doing, we are trying to understand the spread of infection, looking at the first wave and then looking at how that's spreading, and a number of factors will affect whether there is a second wave and how high that is, and that includes the prevalence of infection, so how much infection we have in the community and how fast it is spreading. So it is likely there is a second wave. Due to the actions we're taking, which are very strong in terms of lockdown, we are unable at this point to calculate exactly how high or how long the second wave will be. We have managed very well on the first wave and done extremely good work to ensure that that wave was low, the NHS was able to manage. So we are working in the same way, making sure that we have the right plans in place so that we can manage a second wave, so that the NHS is able to cope, our communities are able to cope, and that the spread of infection is as minimised as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Chief Executive, can I call you to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. One of the things that we are doing at the moment, the government has asked local authorities to start to produce what they have called local outbreak control plans. And we're due to all local upper tier local authorities, so counties and unitary authorities, are due to produce first draft plans by the end of June. And effectively what this is doing is codifying what we were already planning to do anyway, which is effectively how do we make a plan to be able to deal with a spike that is a second wave, or to be able to deal with local outbreaks that may pop up at different places across the island. Now, at the moment, that's all being managed nationally, and that's why we have a national lockdown. But the government is very much moving towards local plans at the upper tier local authority level, so that we, using our public health powers and our environmental health powers, we'll be able to try to deal with and manage those outbreaks that may occur locally. So that's one thing that we're currently working on, and we're due to produce a plan by the end of June. At the same time, we've been working very, very closely with all of our care homes, and we had to produce a care home support plan, which was due by the 29th of May, and that was submitted on time to government, and it's referenced in the report. So that's about the support we're giving to care homes to ensure that they have sufficient resource, sufficient capacity to be able to contain the spread of the virus in the care homes and manage any outbreaks. So all of that is ongoing at the moment. And as I alluded to right at the start, we haven't really stepped back our response approach. So we still have lots of assets in place to enable us to respond if we did come to a second wave, or if we did have to deal with those outbreaks. The challenge that we're going to get across the next few months is how much effort we put into recovery and how much effort we put into response, because I see it being a balance. We'll be wanting to try and recover as much as we possibly can, but as soon as we start to get outbreaks, then we're going to need to go back into response mode and try and respond in the appropriate way. So it is a balancing act that we have to kind of work across for the rest of the year in terms of trading one off against the other. And you're right, Councillor Lilly, in terms of impact on finances. The finances that we've put forward so far are estimated on the basis that the government has asked us to estimate them, which is to assume there won't be a second wave.
Thank you for that, Chief Executive. Councillor Lilly, did you want to ask a supplementary to that?
Well, I just totally acknowledge John's answer, but I'm just sort of perplexed by the last bit, is that we have to assume a second phase. I just feel that that's a big ask, really, a wave, and perhaps we need to make that known to the government within that. I find it surprising that we have to make that assumption.
Chief Executive.
Chairman, thank you. I think I've made two comments. I think, firstly, I think that really underlines Mr. Ward's comments earlier about when we plan our financial recovery plan, not to draw on general reserves, because if we do get to a second wave, that would take us into the case of having to look at general reserves, and that's where we'd need to make an emergency budget. So that's very prudent, very sensible for us to do that. As I say, we can only go on what the government have asked us to prepare and to provide to inform their views nationally and their work nationally. But I can also say that there is an awful lot of lobbying and discussion going on that's been led by the Local Government Association to talk about funding for local authorities as we come through the pandemic and to deal with second waves. I didn't mention earlier, but there is also funding available for us to introduce the outbreak control plans. £300 million has been allocated. We're not sure of our share yet, but That's something that we still need to understand. And of course, as the leader alluded to earlier, he and the MP and the deputy leader have also been in dialogue with the Minister for Local Government about our financial position, our island deal, and the potential impact of the virus as a whole on the island, but also a second wave.
Thank you, Chief Executive. If I can bring myself in at this point. So obviously the financial side of things is a great challenge, whatever it goes forwards, particularly if there's, and as Councillor Lilly has been discussing, the idea of a second wave. I think, what are the other challenges, Chief Executive, do you see in terms of there being a second wave, in terms of the fact that we have seen quite a considerable number of staff redeployed, potentially deployed back into services that we may have recovered, only then having to further redeploy them? Are you able to sort of give some flavour of your thinking in those circumstances?
Thank you, Chairman. I think I alluded to it, between this balance between recovery and response. So I think we know some of the services that we would like to recover, and of course, as we recover them, then we may do less in terms of response. But actually, I see it as being very much a flip side of things. So if we do need to go back into response, we will have to dial back on some of the services that we are currently providing. And of course, some of those services are our discretionary services that we can choose to provide or not provide. The other thing that we do have to take into account when we're doing that is, is whether or not we wish to stand up some of those services as well. So there will be a conversation, I'm sure, that at the moment the government have not yet allowed us to stand up some services like libraries and community centres and those sorts of activities. Theatres were not yet able to reopen anyway. The challenge for us might be, when we do get to look at those particular services, is with all the social distancing measures that go with it, whether or not it's appropriate for us to do that at this time, and whether we should carry on in the response phase.
Thank you, Chief Executive. At the moment, the only other indication I have is Councillor Lilly. I'm aware of colleagues haven't, there are a couple of colleagues who may not yet have put forward questions. Do let us know if you have those. May I also open it at this point, if they want to indicate in the chat bar other members of the council who aren't members of this committee who may wish to ask a question, if they want to indicate as well. But otherwise, I'll take Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. I particularly wish to ask a question about the app, because that was obviously a significant item that the government asked us, and we did contribute as an island. And I mean, basically 38% of the whole population, i.e. 53,000, actually took up the app. And I put myself and my wife in that category as well, because we wanted to see the app help the country, but also help ourselves. So how many people have actually used the app, have tested positive via the tests ordered by the app, and how many people on average have been of a person registering symptoms? Because that actually is the two things that was extremely being tried out by the app, and it would be good for the population to know the results.
Chief Executive, do you want to take that, or do you want to pass it to another officer?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I think I can help with some of it, and I'll ask whether the Deputy Chief Executive, Assistant Chief Executive, would like to come in as well, because she was working directly on that project. One of the challenges that we have had and continue to have, I think, Councillor Lilly, is, and this is common across all local authorities, is getting good quality data coming out of the Department for Health and Social Care, apologies. And that's largely because they have stood up so many different arrangements for testing and tracing and all those other sorts of activities that I think they themselves have really struggled to hold their data together. We don't particularly, as yet, the data is generally held by the Department for Health and Social Care in terms of the numbers around the app, although the Minister did say publicly that about 500 people had registered symptoms through the app. Thereafter, anybody who has tested positive, that hasn't yet been disclosed, and that's partly because I understand the numbers are relatively small, so it could be possible to identify individuals. Therefore, you've got issues of protecting personal data and protecting people's security. Although, as we get towards the end of the rollout phase of the app on the Isle of Wight, we are expecting a full report coming back from the Department for Health and Social Care, which will talk about all the lessons learned, all the activity and everything that they have sort of gleaned from the work they've been doing on the island and with the Isle of Wight Council. I'm not sure whether the Assistant Chief Executive would like to add any comments, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Would you wish to do so, Assistant Chief Executive? Thank you,
Chair. I don't have anything specific to add to what you've already heard from the Chief Executive. As he already mentioned, the data is not owned by the Isle of Wight Council, it's owned by the Department for Health and Social Care. I think the important thing to recognise moving forward as well, that the app forms part of the bigger test and trace programme that is now rolled out via the NHS, and therefore the individual data for areas will be feeding back to local authorities as part of information that comes through to help us plan and implement whatever mechanisms we put in through our outbreak management plans at a local level. That data and how it arrives to us is still being considered at a national level, but it will clearly be an important part of our understanding of what's happening locally as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will now take Councillor.
Chairman, excuse me, sorry, it may also be worth bringing in the Director of Public Health for a comment on this issue as well.
I'm very happy to. Mr. Bryant.
Many thanks, Chair. I think just to emphasise what John said, what we had with the app was an early way of testing everybody who had symptoms. It wasn't rolled out across the country. Now we're getting to a place where everyone can get tested, which is really positive. So we were very early on able to identify those who had symptoms and support them and support their contacts. As the Chief Executive said, there is a huge number of ways we can get tested, which is very positive, and all the positive results come through Public Health England, and we work with their contacts, and if they're in a complex setting, we support those settings. So there's a huge variety of positives coming from different sources, and that enables us to manage the outbreak across the island and indeed in specific locations. So we are beginning to get that data, as the Deputy Chief Executive said.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. I will now take Councillor Jill Kennett, and can I let Councillor Jones Evans and then Councillor Brodie know that I will take questions. So, Councillor Kennett.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is really about the island's dependence on the tourism trade and how we're going to balance that during what will be a shortened season, I expect, against the potential increase maybe of COVID-19 if we do start to get more visitors coming. I know we rely on them heavily as part of our financial balance on the island. I just wondered what thoughts were on that.
Chief Executive, do you want to take that or pass it to another officer?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to take that one. I think Mrs. Kennett raises an interesting point, and effectively the dilemma that we face as a visitor, an island with a visitor economy. I think we know people will come to the island anyway. We know that lots of hotels and lots of accommodation have got forward bookings for July, August and September. The government have indicated that it's likely to release the lockdown on the hospitality industry from the 4th of July. Although on some reports I was seeing they may even do some elements of hospitality a little bit earlier. So what we have to do, and what we are doing at the moment, is actively trying to work out a plan where linked to our outbreak management plans, where we can balance the needs of one against the other and really think proactively about how we do that. And a huge amount of that we'll take from the lessons we learned from the app about how to campaign, how to really give the best possible advice that we can to all the tourism businesses, and that'll come through our regulatory services teams to make sure that they're COVID secure and they're COVID prepared, but also the messages that were given to visitors when they come to the island about the things that we would like them to do to help us protect the island's vulnerable community. So for me, I would like them to make sure that everybody downloads the app when they come to the island, everyone who's able to do so, because that will certainly help with contact tracing once people have left the island, if we need to get into that place. I'd like us to reinforce all the messages about social distancing, about personal responsibility, and all the things that go with that. But people are hearing that nationally, but I think we need to do it at a more local, a more micro level, as a call to action for all of our visitors who come here. So a call to action, say, come and enjoy the Isle of Wight, but please do it responsibly and have the island's safety and the island's community in mind when you do so. And that's a campaign that we're starting to think about now in readiness for the 4th of July. I know the leader, Chairman, has a personal interest in this, and he may wish to also add a comment to what I've said.
Leader of the Council, I think you would like to add to that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, and it's a good question. So, as you will have seen from a number of the recent press releases that we put out, we've tried to take a safety first approach, because there are many island residents who are concerned still, even about coming out of their door. So we need to reflect that, and we need to take that into account. But as the questioner rightly highlights, tourism and employment on the Isle of Wight are a very, very significant part of our economy. And people do not want to lose their jobs, and people have already lost one winter. And if we're not careful, they're going to have a summer that's a second winter. So we'll be into what they call the 3 winter scenario. Government have indicated the 4th of July is the date for opening of hospitality. And so what we're doing over the next 2 to 3 weeks is encouraging our businesses, particularly in that area, to prepare themselves. Chief Executive is absolutely right. People need to be considering social distancing. And unfortunately, not all businesses will be able to trade as they did before. I'll give you one example. Members will have seen the recent press release by the Cowes Harbour Commissioner regarding yachts, and people concerned about yachts coming to the island. Well, if it's a day trip, it doesn't stop them doing that. But as I pointed out to him, they shouldn't be staying overnight in their yachts. And somebody asked me why, and I said, well, because that's the government guidance. And at this stage, we're not ready for that. Equally, island residents going to the Hamble or beyond have to apply the same guidance. So we are there. We're treading carefully with it as we go. There is a pressure building from, on the one side, the people who can see the potential loss if we don't get our tourist business alive. But on the other side, I think there's a safety first. And I find myself with officers right in the middle. We won't please everybody, but we'll try and please as many as we can.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I'll take Councillors Jones-Evans and then Councillor Brodie, and then I know Councillor Hollis you have indicated, and then I will have Councillor Love. So a little queue is forming, but I'll take you in that order. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Hope you can hear me okay. So my question relates to basically the easing down of lockdown and the return to business as normal, as much as we can do. And anyone who's been on in meetings with me for the last few weeks will know that I've been banging a particular drum for getting the social distancing in our towns done. So business can reopen, because I think there's a real danger, because we don't have so many tourists over. I think there's a real danger that businesses will open. And looking at the latest research that was released today, consumers are saying they're spending more, 30% more online. They're going to continue doing that, and they're also, it's going to be like a trickle back to the high street, because there's still quite a lot of anxiety about coming back. So I guess I'm coming from a space where people are going to be coming off furlough, and they won't be able to go back on furlough from tomorrow. That's the end of new furlough. So I'm just concerned that we could be facing businesses that open and maybe close again. This could be not just retail and services, it can, hospitality and also hotels as well, all in the same situation, such a shortened season as well. So I guess my sort of thrust of my question is, how are we going to be prepared, and what's it going to be like for the island if we do have a lot of unemployment in the autumn times? So supplementary to that is I've been contacted by various people from across the island who want to do some more softening, softer measures and messaging to sort of give that feeling of reassurance to people who do come back to towns and villages. They want to sort of give a COVID confident message. And I think what's a little bit unclear at the moment, I'm sure that will become clear in the next week or so, is the mechanism for individual areas be able to get some more sort of softer social distancing measures and messages out there. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor. Chief Executive, do you want to pick this up to start with?
Thank you, Chairman. I am just trying to turn on my camera. Oh, there we go. Chairman, I'll speak while I try and turn on my camera. So thank you. Yes. I think the Director of Neighbourhoods is well placed to talk about the measures around what we're trying to put into our towns as around infrastructure to help social distancing and to try and promote people to come back to those towns. So I'll leave it to him to comment on those. I think Councillor Jones-Evans raises a very significant concern that we have about the future of the island's economy if we don't try and make the best of the summer season, bearing in mind all the points I made earlier. And again, there are points that have been made by both the MP and the leader, as the leader alluded to earlier in a letter to government. It's issues that we are raising as officers with civil servants in both the MHCLG and the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department. So we are having those conversations. I think there's also a concern there for the local enterprise partnership, and it itself is trying to put together a recovery plan for businesses that would support businesses through those potentially more difficult times. So I don't have an immediate answer. I don't have a toolbox of tools that we could use at this particular point.
That door, please.
But it is a very live issue that we are having discussions with as many people as possible. Colin, your microphone's on. So we are having as many conversations as we possibly can with government and the appropriate officials to raise these issues, but they are common conversations that are happening across the island, and certainly something that the local government association is aware of and is continuing to lobby for, and we are feeding into those conversations. Colin, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add, Director of Neighbourhoods.
Director of Neighbourhoods, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, apologies, Chairman. My son is cooking away at the background, and you could hear me trying to tell him to shut the door. What we're doing is very much a statement of intent, and members would have seen what's happening in Newport in terms of the hard, if you want to put hard measures, but they're temporary measures, pop-up measures that we put in Newport. It basically is a statement of intent more than other things. It's about a message we're getting out there that we are trying to remind people and trying to support businesses coming back. That's also being supported by the advice that the regulatory services are providing to businesses in terms of advice, information, and also information packs that businesses are able to download and put within their shops and facilities to actually give that message to the public and to actually give them that assurance as well. So we're doing a lot of this. We're starting in Newport, going to Ryde. We're actually then going out to the rest of the island to some other communities. And some of you would have been involved in the Parish and Town Council meeting that we had last Wednesday when we started to talk about it more widely. And we've got another meeting tomorrow with the Town and Parish Council as well. We'll be providing more information on how we're actually rolling these out throughout the island. The other thing I'd say in terms of the measures, as I said before, they're a statement of intent. You can't possibly cover everywhere with those measures that we're trying to deliver, but we are looking at softer measures in other areas in terms of the markings on the roads and the signage, and also thinking about barriers potentially when the barriers become on board. So effectively, advice to businesses, advice to members of the public, making the public aware that it's personal responsibility in a lot of ways, but also backing that up with the harder measures that we're introducing.
Thank you for that. I know Councillor Lilly would like to follow on that, but I do have a bit of a list. We won't lose your question, Councillor Lilly, but I just know that there have been colleagues who have been waiting a little while. So if I could take Councillor Brodie next, please.
Hello there, everybody. Nice to see everybody. I'd like to ask a question that no doubt you'll put to Chris Ward, but I'd like to see perhaps another cabinet member take part in the scrutiny committee tonight, because we've only seen Dave Stewart so far. And I'd like to follow on where Councillor Quirk was exploring initially regarding reserves. Now, obviously we have shortfall on reserves, and thanks to Councillor Hutchinson's management of resources and the direction of the Director of Finance, you've built up as an administration a significant amount of reserves, around about 11-12 million, I believe it is at the moment. Now, Mr. Ward said earlier in response to Mr. Quirk that we would still have to retain £7 million of reserves, or we'd be in Section 141 territory. The very obvious question that follows on from that Chris perhaps didn't ask, that I'd like to ask, can Mr. Ward and Councillor Hutchinson explain to me, and perhaps to Ireland as well, what is the purposes of reserves if they're not to deal with the consequences of a pandemic? Are they just something that we continually roll forward and never ever use? You think about your household account. You're all very wealthy people, I'm sure. But, you know, if I have a few £100 in the bank and a bill comes in that I wasn't expecting, I use that £100. I don't, you know, go and try and rob somebody or anything like that. I actually keep the money in hand. And it's just a mystery to me. And it's often mentioned to me by residents over the years, this question of keeping reserves that are never used. I'd like to know what's worse than a pandemic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I'll put that direct to Mr. Ward, and then perhaps if Councillor Hutchinson, if you can stand by to further comment. So, Mr. Ward.
Thank you, Chair. It is actually a a question that you get asked often, and it is an obvious question to ask. I think the answer to it is, without getting into the nuts and bolts of the requirements, the legislative requirements, is that the reserves are there to be used in such emergency situations, but as soon as you use them, you need to have a plan to remedy them back up to the minimum level, so that you're always in a position to be able to respond in any emergency situation. So they're not to be used and drained and taken down to an unsustainable level that will effectively take you into what would be a overall, for want of a better word, an overall overdrawn position. But they are there to remain at a particular level so that you can deal with emergencies in the very short term, but you always need to have a plan to remedy.
Could I come back, Chair?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Brodie.
Just very briefly, I mean, I understand what Mr. Ward says, and hopefully you'll bring in Councillor Hutchinson in a second, but that still doesn't stack up from what we were told earlier, that we're going to retain the 7 million pretty much no matter what. And we're clearly going to be in a position where we've got £10 million shortfall in the current budget. It's potentially going to get worse with a second wave of this pandemic. And it just seems to me, surely the message to Irelanders will be, we have 7 million of reserves. We will use some of that if necessary. But of course, We will, being a good financial planner, that's not, you know, as you like to call yourself as an administration, we will put in place a plan to restore those to the level that the Director of Finance requires, rather than this almost cut and dried, we'll never use reserves, which is the message I got earlier. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I think this is the point to take Councillor Hutchinson, if you could.
Yeah. I've unmuted and on camera.
You are indeed.
You can hear me. Okay. Obviously, we've got to be prudent. The worry we have is letting reserves go below that absolute minimum. We've got about 12.2, and a proportion of those reserves we will have to transfer to the new fire authority. So that will probably leave us around about 3 or 4 millions before we get to the 7 million that Councillor Brodie has mentioned. The difficulty we have, and we have been talking to government about this, is that if we drop below that 7 million, then the draconian provisions of a Section 114 notice come into play, and that makes it extremely difficult to actually run the council. So we will do our damnedest to preserve services first. We don't want to see any reductions to services. They're our top priority. We will try to hold on to the basic minimum of reserves so that we don't draw ourselves into Section 114 territory. And I was reading the SIPFA guidance, which was published about 3 years ago on this, just to see what would actually happen if we dropped below that level. And it would make the council almost impossible to run. And that's not something that we want. Our worry is the extent of any potential second wave, because there is a huge cost to that. And as the leader said earlier, we are talking to government ministers and we are pressing very hard to put the island's case. I think we have not only the unique problem of being offshore, but also the difficulty of having a very high elderly population. So we've got to be extremely careful as to how we manage this pandemic. And we also have to be aware that, as Mr. Ward has said, that we are likely to lose the 2.5 millions that we were hoping for next year. And obviously councillors will also be aware that the medium-term financial strategy, which hasn't gone away, requires a saving of 3.5 millions in each of the future 3 financial years. So we're going to start off with around about 6 millions. And then we have other commitments we can see coming over the hill. We know, for example, that the negotiations with staff unions are taking place now, and an offer is already on the table of 2.75%. That's probably going to cost us about £500,000 more than we expected. And the difficulty is that without something in the back pocket, we're going to find it extremely difficult to cope with preparing a 21-22 budget. So our priority has to be preserving services first, and we will use whatever financial headroom we've got to ensure that happens.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. Councillor Hollis, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, it was in relation to looking at when things ease and if we start to get a tourist industry back. I'm not quite sure of the type of tourists that we will get back. I mean, for example, I very much doubt if we'll get the type of coach party that we have, and many are elderly in that category. The reason for my question is that as things pan out, there is going to be a greater need to probably open public lavatories, and they are going to have an increased cost. Is there anything that can be done to help that side? Because remember that when, say, a public house opens or whatever, where we have perhaps relied upon that as a general use as well, when people need to go to the lavatory, they're running under will run under a totally different regime themselves. And I wonder if any thought had been put as to what we can do to help, or from our side, with regards to public lavatories. Sorry, someone had to bring the subject up, so.
It's a very important and very obviously for people who are just members of the public. It's one of the it is a particular thing that I know has troubled people during the whole of the last few weeks. Chief Executive, do you want to pick this up? But you may want to pass that over.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, obviously, as members will be aware, I don't believe that we actually own any public conveniences any longer. Most are now within the remit of town and parish councils. We are working to help, and we can, through our regulatory services, help and support those town and parish councils in identifying the actions they need to do to reopen those facilities. And we are also, with our regulatory services teams, working to support some of those businesses that Councillor Hodge refers to, who may need to put alternative arrangements in place to enable social distancing in their facilities. I think the challenge we have at the moment, and I do think it will be helpful when people can actually go inside the facilities, is that we have an awful lot of people who are taken away from cafes and restaurants and those sorts of places, and unfortunately people are just choosing to sort of dump litter wherever they've taken it. So I think once we can get people going back inside, then I think that will be to benefit as well. But we're very happy, and we've got all the regulatory services team are offering advice and guidance to whomever needs it to be able to reopen those facilities.
Thank you, Chief Executive. First of all, can I just remind my colleagues that the chat bar, if possible, you use just for indicating that you wish to speak. For the benefit of the public, there has been a side discussion, so I will just allow them to know of that. It was a question about a £1.7 million that has come back into reserves, which the Director of Finance has responded is a capital receipt. I do know in the responses to the set of questions that were put to the Chief Executive, this was discussed, I believe, in a little detail, so obviously it will come into the public domain properly, but it's only fair that I acknowledge there was a side discussion which in normal circumstances we probably would have had in main committee. Next on my list is Councillor Love, and then it will be Councillor Lilly. Councillor Love.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you, it's a little quiet.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Andrew. It's very much appreciated in this new era of openness. I can't believe that we're actually sat in the meeting talking about public toilets when they actually are all a part of the parish and town councils. My priority in all of this is about the health and well-being of our population and putting the people first. And money, whilst it's important at this moment in time, we have to look at the health and well-being of our people. So with that in mind, I'm becoming increasingly concerned about people reporting to me their health appointments on the mainland being cancelled, and people not being able to attend appointments at the various hospitals in Portsmouth and Southampton, particularly those with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses. We need to quickly reassure people, and particularly from a public health point of view, that those appointments can be opened up as soon as possible, because they are being continually cancelled. So that's the first point. The other point I want to make is that you know, we hear about a second wave. The onus on money has to be surely placed, as Councillor Stewart has said, firmly and squarely on the shoulders of government. We cannot have this question of money hanging over us and dominating the debate, when actually what we need to be looking at closely is the health and well-being and what we do to prevent this virus from spreading further, particularly as we've got a second wave potentially forecast. And reopening on the 4th of July. Does that bring that into any question at all in terms of what we should be doing as an island? And again, leading on from that, I'd like to see better signage, particularly from the Southampton side. What are we doing with our partners in Southampton and Portsmouth in terms of getting the message out about travelling to our island? Very, very important things. So lots and lots of questions for you, and thank you for me allowing to.
You're welcome, Councillor. I'll call in the Chief Executive, but you may wish to pass those in part to others.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, if I may, the Director of Public Health will follow me, I think, and talk about some of those particular issues. I think what I would say in sort of general response around appointments is, I know that there is a general concern across the health sector that their people are not attending for the appointments that they should be attending for, that they are perhaps staying away from the acute hospital settings because they have some fears about COVID-19, and I can understand that. But I know the health sector is starting to do a real push now and a real campaign to encourage people to go back and take those appointments up and fill those slots, because it is important that people are able to do so. If we have specific examples of appointments being cancelled on a regular basis, I'm very happy to take them up with the appropriate CCGs in order to develop that further for the particular individuals in question. In terms of the wider points that Councillor Love has raised, I understand the issue about protecting the community, and that's why I alluded earlier to this need to get the balance between recovery and protection. I think that we know that people will come to the island regardless, because people have been locked down for a number of weeks. The opportunity to come out, if that's allowed on the 4th of July, and of course the government have set 5 tests that they would expect to be adhered to for the 4th of July to be available and for people to be able to open on the 4th of July. But in that sense, we have to be prepared to accept those people who may come and then manage them in the best possible way that allows us to protect the health and well-being of our community, whilst at the same time recognising that people will come anyway. If I may, Chairman, I'll pass to the Director of Public Health with your approval.
Yes, you may. So, Mr. Bryant.
Many thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Chief Executive. So yes, in terms of the appointments, the Chief Executive is absolutely correct that the hospitals and the health service are encouraging people back to those appointments. I think people were staying away when actually we need them to come for their urgent appointments. Obviously, some routine appointments were postponed during the preparation for what was the first wave, and now they're all being stood up, and I'm part of a piece of work with the NHS across the region to make sure we stand up those services really carefully in line with the policies and in line with making sure we can manage any kind of COVID cases as well. With regard to travel, I do chair a group called Preventing Spread of Infection, which is part of a Pan Hampshire group including both cities, the county and the islands, and that absolutely looks at all the messages and making sure that we can be coherent on messaging around travel, around social distancing, and certainly we discuss things such as how do we make sure the messages in Southampton and Portsmouth are aligned to the message on the island.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for that. The next question comes from Councillor Lilly, but before I take you, Councillor Lee, colleagues, obviously in supplying something close to 50 questions prior to this meeting, that's allowed us to explore a lot of issues outside, and obviously just to reassure everybody that those questions and their responses will be published. I think we covered a good amount of the sections of the paper actually to ourselves as a committee. I wonder if colleagues could think in terms of the paper to Cabinet and whether they have particular comments or questions around the recovery plan, particularly if they've spotted anything that they feel needs to urgently to be fleshed out, or any gaps that they've noticed. But whilst Councillor Lilly is posing his question and getting a response, perhaps colleagues, you could be putting in mind to that. So Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Andrew. I just wanted to respond to some of the very interesting dialogue. I will put a caveat that I have put questions particularly about regarding care homes and PPE, and particularly the PPE needs of personal assistants, which are actually going into people's homes as well. But I hopefully will get a reply to those questions, but I just want to make it into the public domain that I have asked those. I will move on actually to the post-COVID and the recovery, because this was raised by Councillor Julie Jones. I think it's important that there is some kind of Zoom conference.
Before you proceed, Councillor Lilly, can I just ask, Councillor Church, were you going to ask your question? And I've got Councillor Lilly's connection. Councillor Lilly's connection has gone funny. I wonder if I just wanted to check. The Councillor Churchman had indicated, and I just wanted to check if her question was on the recovery plan side of things, or still just
breaking up, Andrew.
Am I breaking now? Right. If somebody in the chat bar could indicate if I'm breaking up or not for their connection, or whether it's local to Councillor Lilly. No, I think it's Councillor Lilly has a local problem. So Councillor Churchman, I'll take your question. Councillor Lilly, I'll come back to you. But if you're continuing to break up, just type your question into the chat bar and I'll ask that for you. So Councillor Churchman.
Yes, my question is, we talk about recovery of the island. Not once have I heard a mention of the Chamber of Commerce. I am assuming we are talking to them, but after all, they represent some fantastic number of businesses on this island, but yet not to mention of them. So I want to know, are we talking to them? How often? How do they see the recovery of the island? Because we're just councillors, we're not running businesses, but they are in contact with most of the businesses on the island. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. I'll ask the Leader of the Council to respond to that one.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's a bit slow, but I'm sure we're getting there. Yeah, so we've had a number of conversations with the Chamber of Commerce and in particular, Steve Holbrook, the Chief Executive, as has our Island MP. Steve has actually presented a number of difficult cases which have come to him around funding of businesses, which are what we call slip through the net because of their restraints around business rates and things. We've connected them up with the local Southern Enterprise Partnership, who have recently introduced a new fund. Excuse me a moment. And we have an ongoing dialogue with the Chamber because, as you rightly say, Councillor Churchman, they do represent not all, but a substantial number of island businesses, as do the Federation of Small Businesses, and our Economic Development Board, chaired by Norman Arnold, has produced that in as well. So we are in touch. I want to reassure you we are in touch with those various businesses and indeed the Chamber and we're trying to work together with our partners because we all want to see the best for our island.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Churchman, did you want to come back on that, or otherwise I shall move back to Councillor Lilly? I think you're muted, Councillor Churchman.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for the reply. I still feel, however, that do they have a recovery plan in mind, because they're at the sharp end of what is going on? Thank you.
So I'll respond to that. What we're doing on our recovery plan, we probably, sorry, Chair.
You do. I just know that the Director of Regeneration also might wish to comment, so I'll take him afterwards. So I'll take you first, Councillor.
I was just going to pick up that point. It was a very valid point about recovery plans, because we've got a recovery plan. The NHS has got a recovery plan. The fire service has got a recovery plan. There's a lot of people got recovery plans. And one of the important thing is we do join that up, because we could all end up otherwise putting a lot of energy into different things, and we want to have a combined effort. And it's one of the benefits of working as one public service. So I think that'll answer that, but I will default to the Director of Regeneration. I think he'll give a more comprehensive update because he's been personally involved.
Mr. Ashman, if you could, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce the leader's point about correlation and coordination of that recovery planning, and the Chamber's involvement in that going forward will be key. The main issue is as the Council and the Chief Executive has referred to, is that the Chamber have been really concentrating on this response agenda, ensuring that their members and other island businesses are able to access the government support mechanisms and try and survive as many businesses as we can. And I think as a regular member of the Economic Board, the leader has referred to, they'll play an active part now in shaping the economic recovery of the island.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ashman. Colleagues, do you have any other questions that you wish to put around the recovery plan? Otherwise, I will myself. I wouldn't mind getting I've got the Chief Executive.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just going to add, if I may, to the Director of Generations comments, because I do think that we need to see the recovery plan as an all-island recovery plan. So it's about not only the economic benefit, but it's the social benefit and the environmental benefit as well. So we need to see it as a whole. And that's why we need to engage with as many stakeholders as possible from across the island, so that we can support businesses to rebuild, we can support communities to rebuild, we can support the health sector, we can support everybody in terms of trying to get somewhere like we were before, prior to the pandemic. And our plan is very much focused across those pieces. We've got to try and learn the lessons that have come out of the last 12 weeks, as Councillor Merwell alluded to earlier. So actually what's worked well for us over the last 12 weeks that we could take forward into the future. And we've also got to work very closely with people, as Councillor Lilly has alluded to, from the different community groups. So we need to see it as a whole island recovery plan that we're all bought into, that helps economy, the social development, and also environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metcalfe. Actually, that allows me to one question that sort of follows on from that, and you've already started to answer that question. For it to be a whole island recovery plan, it needs, the whole island is every single last resident of this island. It'd be great to have the thoughts, possibly through the leader of the council first, on how to really engage with every resident. We've had a period quite necessarily of so much being done to people and people being great at responding to that. Now is an opportunity to stand up those ways of bringing people into conversations. I wondered what the leader of the council had in the way of thinking of really extending, building on things like maybe cabinet in the community, as you have done, but going even further to get that whole community engagement in the recovery plan, because it's all of us who are ultimately recovering from this.
Thank you, Chair. Well, four things immediately come to mind. The Chief Executive and I are working on a letter which will go out to our whole community to give them a kind of update. If you can recall, a couple of months ago, it doesn't seem that long, but it seems longer, we circulated a letter to the community to make them aware of exactly what we were doing at that stage. I think the time is going to be soon right for a further letter to engage our community and to give them an update. It's reassuring when they know where we're going. The second thing we've got in place, and as the Director of Neighbourhoods alluded to, we've had one and we'll have a second meeting with our Town and Parish Council clerks and chairman to keep them informed, because they are playing quite a crucial role at the moment. I'm sure most of the members before you have got connections with their local ward areas where the amount of work that those officers and staff are doing is terrific, and we need to acknowledge that. And I think the third thing that we need to look at is what I call enablement meetings, where we've got our business community, we've got our volunteer community, and it's different to, and I'm grateful for Michael Lilly's work that he did with the volunteer sector in the outset, and I know Jill is on this line as well. But this is about focusing on those volunteer leads, the leaders, to make sure they've got sustainability. One of my big concerns at the moment is just the sheer volume of work that those volunteers have been doing, both in terms of deliveries of the prescriptions, the food, the phone calls, and without that, I think the island wouldn't be in the good place that it is compared with some. But that may not be sustainable over time, particularly if we open the economy and people have to go back to work. And sustaining volunteer groups is going to be a really important. And I think the other one, which I know Michael Lilly will agree with me on, I think we've yet to understand the full impact on the mental health and well-being of our community of just being locked away. And I think that is also something we need to have an effective plan for. So we've got a number of initiatives. It's not all of them. Those are the four that came to mind, Chair. But at least I can give you a starter for 10 on that.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. That's useful. I was about to tee up Councillor Lilly, but Councillor Merwell, you would like to just come in on the back of those comments from the Leader of the Council. So if I take you first.
Hopefully you can hear me.
I can do so, Councillor Merwell.
Just a quick follow-up question to the leader. With any communications to parish town councils and the businesses, can you ensure that all the members, the 40 members, are included in any communications so we actually know what they've been told? Sometimes it appears that parish and town councils know more than we do in certain circumstances, which is slightly embarrassing. So if you could bear us in mind.
Yes, I think Michael makes an extremely good point, and I do want to prepare a leaders brief for all members, because there's so much has happened so quickly, and a cabinet team of 10 can keep their mind around it because they're doing it on a daily basis. The chairs of our various committees have been pretty good at keeping their mind on their business areas, but there are some councillors who are just out there doing their ward work. And as you rightly say, Michael, could lose touch with some of the activities. So I definitely would take that on board. I have tried to circulate as regularly as I can the information we get through the local government association. I'm sure members have seen that. I think that is a useful milestone to know what the big picture is like. But I absolutely will take that on board. I think it's a valid challenge, if you like, and so that will go up on my priority list to make sure members are kept updated. But fortunately, through our group leaders meeting, and I know we've got a couple on this call, we've managed to delegate it out in different ways, and I'm definitely in contact with Rodney Downer to reassure you all.
Thank you.
So thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Lilly now.
Hello, can you hear me clearly? Is that better?
I can hear you clearly, yes.
Thank you. I think it's important. I'm glad and thank Councillor Stewart for bringing up regarding the trauma, and that collectively, we all feel coming through the experience, and it's going to get harder as we come out. We do need to take the community with us, and we need to recognise that people are very fearful of people coming. We haven't raised the issue of second homers, but people, particularly in my area on the east of the island, were very, very anxious about people that were actually coming to the island during lockdown. And I think there needs to be a sort of real reassurance to the community that we are safe. The reality is the R factor in Southampton and Portsmouth is higher than it is on the island. So it is reasonable to say that if there was a second wave, it could come from infection that is coming from the mainland. We can't get away from that, and we do need to take our community with us by reassuring them that we are doing everything. I liked the information Mr. Metcalf gave regarding, for instance, perhaps using the app or using other means to in Portsmouth and in Southampton before people travel over. But we do need to get this message that the community are not being done to. They are part of the solution, and we have a kind of tension between the need for jobs, the need to get the businesses going, but we also need to be safe to our community, and we can't underestimate the fear and the anger that was created by some of the second homer activity that has actually happened, and particularly in the east of the island.
So, Chief Executive or the leader, is there anything you want to pick up from that?
Chairman, if I may, I think just a couple of minor points. I do think, and I think the Director of Public Health will be able to speak on this better than I, we do have to be careful when we're comparing the R factors around Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight, because it's very, very hard. The sample size on the island is relatively small. It doesn't quite work out as easily as some organisations have portrayed in terms of trying to work it out. And there is quite a large statistical deviation from what it might be given those sample sizes. However, I think we have to really look on the positive sides about how well the island has done as a community in terms of protecting itself from the spread of the virus. So, only 200 confirmed cases of COVID-19 is real positive. I think, as in terms of upper tier local authorities, the last time I checked yesterday, we had the 8th lowest rate of infection per 100,000 in the country at an upper tier local authority level. And therefore, I think that's something that's worth trying to hang on to at all costs. And so what we do need to do, I think, is work very closely with our communities to get those messages right, to engage with the visitors when our visitors arrive and talk to them in the right way, so that they recognise the strength of the community and all the things that come with that. And that's something that we really do have to work on over the course of the next couple of weeks before we get to the 4th of July. The other thing I would add, and I didn't make, in case I didn't bring this out earlier, is we have to think that we're going to be in this for the long term. I don't think that we're going to get, this could be an 18-month piece of work that we have to get through until there's a vaccine or an antidote and all those sorts of things that the government are currently working on. So we really have to think about our whole strategy over that longer period, how we engage with our community, and I think Councillor Lilly's right, on a very regular basis, but we have to get the right set of stakeholders together. We have to get them talking in the right way, and we have to get the right messages crafted and then responded to. And that's all stuff that's very live in terms of our recovery plans at the moment. I'll stop there, Chairman, but it may be worth just getting a further confirmation from the Director of Public Health. Those are figures.
Thank you, Mr. Metcalf. Mr. Bryant, do you want to add to that?
Many thanks, Chair and Chief Executive. Absolutely, we've got to be very careful on our values. As the Chief Executive said, on small populations and small numbers, they're just not robust and statistically not sound. So that's why it's calculated at a southeast level, and that's really important. We'll be getting a number of data sources, as the Chief Executive said, to support the development of our outbreak plan, so we can look at infection on the island, but we just need to be mindful of the R values. So that there's a number of things, and in the outbreak plan there is something also about transport hubs, and so we'll be working on the ferry hubs both in Southampton, Portsmouth and on the Isle of Wight to make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent spread of infection should because they're known to be a vulnerable spot that we need to look after.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Colleagues, we have been going for about 2 hours on this, but some of us sort of, for technical reasons, dipping out a bit and then coming back in. So I'm going to ask just a question myself, but can I invite you to start thinking about whether we would have recommendations first relating to the response paper, which of course we could just take as noting because it will be something that's always being updated, but there may be points that you want to bring out and as formal recommendations. Probably more helpful, and particularly in mind of the cabinet meeting on Thursday, is what we can recommend to cabinet, because of course it's looking at the recovery framework. But if I can pick up a question whilst colleagues you're thinking of that. One of the things that it sort of follows on from the points that Mr. Bryant and Mr. Metcalfe was saying about local action, the sort of local things that we on the island might decide to do. We've been doing some very good messaging, we've been following government guidelines and whatever, but I just wondered, is there a place for thinking about the island, not going it alone in some rogue sense, but sort of developing some other sort of activities? I was interested in the work in Ceredigion around local contact tracing. Is there something that we might want to do that would supplement the national system? Is there something we may want to do in terms of promoting mask wearing over and above what the government has mandated? So is there something we might want to do that, because the community spirit within the island is strong, and perhaps we can develop something that adds on top of that. I will just finally say that I know that Councillor Tyndall has had to leave us for a family engagement, so he has now left our meeting. But Chief Executive, or perhaps even the Leader of the Council, either if you could pick up on what that additional added value, extra stuff that we might do on the island.
So shall I come in on the masks? And
Yes,
I'll leave the
Councillor Stewart. Yes. Yeah.
Actually, face covers would be an appropriate word, because I think we need to distinguish between face covers, which is the government's recommendation for people. We have on the island, and you may be aware that if you go on the floating bridge now, you will need to wear a face cover. So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. And that applies to all public transport, and including the ferries. So it's a really good opportunity to remind people why they're doing it. So there's a natural. And I have to say, and certainly because my ward has gone full on into this, there are an awful lot of people on the island making face covers. I've seen some with the Isle of Wight flag. I've seen some with all sorts of weird and wonderful things on them. But I think it just is a recognition that people feel they can do something. And so I think we should first of all actively encourage that. But of course, it's not a surgical cover. It's not a face mask. It doesn't give you all the full protection that those masks do. So we need to make that clear as well. Nevertheless, if it gives you a modicum of safety, and actually it deals with a confidence thing as well. I think people have got used to seeing other people wearing masks now. I mean, and I just think that's been a good thing. But the Chief Executive may want to comment on the other points that you've raised, which I know he's been following consistently.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Mr. Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I would absolutely agree, and we do look, and we have looked constantly at what we could do locally. I think the contact tracing is something that we are going to have to pick up anyway as part of the outbreak planning process, largely from the fact that we will have to use our public health team, and we'll need to use our environmental health teams to be able to do some of the contact tracing of the more complex cases, which is what we currently do anyway. So we've already got that team in place. The challenge we have is whether we've got the right capacity to be able to do that, and whether we need to put more into that particular area as we go forward. I think we have made the most use of our unique position in terms of access to the island via the ferry ports, and we've really maximised that and worked very well with the ferry companies in terms of messages that we've wanted to give out. We've worked very well with our island media, and they've been really supportive of what we've tried to do and how we tried to put messages across. So I think we've got a number of unique levers that we have used very well so far, and I think we will continue to use as we go forward. But you know, we're not averse to if people have got other ideas such as those that you've talked about yourself. And I think that's what we pick up through our community engagement and our stakeholder engagement that we necessarily need to put together to help inform our plans. And I think just picking up on the leader's point about face masks on the floating bridge, of course, that came as a result of the government saying that face masks are now required on all forms of public transport, and therefore the floating bridge is public transport, and that's why we have to adhere to the government guidelines. So yes, I think we're trying to look at all those unique features, those unique levers, and we'll continue to do so as we develop our recovery plan. But as I say, I think we're going to be in this for the long run. I think it's going to be an 18-month process. So our plan is going to be iterative. We're going to do things that won't work, and then we'll try and do other things, but we'll do a lot of things that will work and have worked. And we've done a lot of things. I hope the committee will agree. I think we've done a lot of positive things over the last 12 weeks. And what we need to do is maintain the positive energy we've got in the community to look after it, to help look after itself. We need to enable that and support that. And that's very much the approach we want to take with the recovery plans.
Thank you, Chief Executive, for that. And if I can use the phrase of the island leading the way, it would be great to continue to build on those things that you've just been talking about, and further showing how our island can lead the way in so many ways, particularly when a community is so cohesive as ours is. So I have Councillor Lilly and then Councillor Andre both wish to put forward, well, Councillor Lilly, you have a question, but both are thinking of putting forward recommendations. Can I take recommendations relating to the response paper, the paper of the Chief Executive to the Council first? But Councillor Lilly, you have a question first. So Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry, Councillor Garrett, I apologise. It's very difficult not to be personal in this. I wish to, one point is about jobs, and we do need to look at preserving jobs, but we also need to look about jobs creation where we can't. And it's very, it's interesting that the UK's top business leaders recently wrote to Boris Johnson, basically saying that the recovery focus, the recovery planning should be very green orientated and link the health and well-being of people within a healthy environment. We're obviously in a very good position on this island. So I would like to know, my question is, does Isle of Wight Council intend to focus on the green economic potential as part of its recovery plan? My recommendation will then come after that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lilly. Who will take that? I think that's a policy direction, so I think the Leader of the Council to respond to start with.
So I think what Michael, sorry, I missed the last part because it broke away. If you could just repeat that very last part. Councillor
Lilly, if you could, yes, please.
My question is, sorry, different question, sorry. Does Isle of Wight Council intend to focus on the green economic potential as part of its recovery plan?
Thank you. So the short answer to that is yes. One of the opportunities the current pandemic has presented is the opportunity to extend the interest levels in cycling. So you'll be aware, I'm sure, that some of our cycle premises have actually run out of bikes because there's been such an uptake when the exercising came in and the lockdown eased. And we're also looking at, and we have applied successfully, is my understanding, for funding to improve access for cycling. We're also going to be looking at the impact that we can put into planning applications for open space inclusion. And certainly most recent, I'm sure Councillor Quirk will be aware, our emphasis is going to move now to not only development applications, which are important, but how you're meeting that open space and that health and well-being need. So we'll be focusing on that as well. And we're also looking, obviously, we've been looking at prior to the pandemic in areas such as electric vehicles. Solar panels have been a significant area, as you're aware. And so we're looking quite well at how we can maximise our green assets. That's the way to put it, as part of our economic recovery. Albeit that at the moment, people are effectively being driven back into their cars to some degree. I think that is just going to be a relatively short-term thing until we can be in a place where we can get people back into other means of transport. The chief exec may want to add to that because he's aware of some of the projects that are underway, but I think I've probably covered it sufficient for your question.
I think the thrust of an answer is there. Councillor Lilly, so you have a recommendation to put, then I have Councillor Andre who has one and Councillor Millwall who has two. Is it to the response paper, Councillor Lilly?
Yes, it is. I wish to recommend that the health and mental well-being of residents has to be our priority, and we do need to engage with our residents and community in development of a recovery plan. In a sense, we need to have strong lessons learned from the community spirit that has been exceptional during this time.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Did just check with the officer that did you get all of that? Or, so, Councillor Lilly, because we do have a chat bar, could you type your question in to assist the officers? Bear in mind, of course, committees don't set policy, but we can make recommendations around policy development to some extent, and obviously there are policy and scrutiny committees specifically for that sort of thing. Councillor Andre, if I can have your recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, my recommendation probably either follows on from Councillor Lilly's or broadens it out. As Councillor Lilly quite rightly said earlier, in order to have any effective response in the phase that we are currently in and recovery, we do need to be taking the public with us and gaining their confidence and keeping their confidence. And to that end, an update letter was mentioned that is proposed to go out to residents. And my recommendation would be that as part of that update letter, that an invitation be included for residents to participate in a survey to identify priorities. And that could be something that could be both done now while we're in the response phase, but also I would assume that a further letter would be going out once we go into the recovery phase. But I think it's, engaging the community is very important. So I would think that that's a really good opportunity. I would appreciate it would probably have to be potentially an online survey, but there could be on the letter there could be an address that perhaps people could write suggestions in. But I think that letter is the key to community engagement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Councillor Millwall, you have two recommendations. I think you're still muted, Councillor Millwall. And I think that's still the case. I think at the moment Councillor Millwall is muted at the moment. So whilst that Councillor Mowell is sorting that out, I think Councillor Lilly is still typing it so that the chat bar captures his recommendation, and we have something now which I will read, so that the committee would recommend to Cabinet that the health and well-being of the island residents has to be the Council's priority, and residents are actively engaged into the development of the recovery of the island, the way they wish to see their future. And then a commentary to that would be, we need to honour the community spirit that has been exceptional on the island and maintain it. Councillor Murwell is indicating that he is attempting to unmute at the moment. If you are unable to unmute, you can take the Councillor Lilly option of typing into the chat bar, and I will read your recommendations out. Before taking those recommendations to any form of vote, obviously we may discuss them. But also I'm aware that to some extent that these may be things that actually the Leader of the Council would want to say, well, those are inherent anyway, so he could give an indication as to the extent to which he pretty much takes those on board anyway. So Councillor Stewart, would you like to just comment about those proposed recommendations? Would they be in line in any way with your Cabinet view?
So first of all, as always, I will take those recommendations to Cabinet first of all, so that they have an opportunity to give their perspective on it, because clearly they would affect their areas. The general principle of communication with the public I'd already raised, because we intend to send letters out anyway, and the principle of supporting, which I do, understanding of the mental health and wellbeing impact of what has happened, and the tremendous work the volunteers. I think I'm probably, like many, regularly complimenting the volunteers, because I think we can't give them a lot, but we can say thank you. And I think that's really important. So in the spirit of what you're saying, yes, but as always, I would take that to Cabinet now, and we will consider the recommendations once they're circulated.
So if we make those recommendations, there is clearly an open door to be pushed at, but you may refine and review that. I know that Councillor Murwell now is unmuted. So Councillor Murwell, if I can take your recommendations.
Two things. One, just reconfirming what I said earlier about a living document that is lessons learned, to confirm that we're actually going to create it, and there's going to be an owner, and it's not just a negative document, it's also things that everyone's done well, either through the council or through local community, and how that has helped. So there's positive and negative things that we can actually document and move forward for. Secondly, this is obviously a massive pandemic that has affected the whole of the world, first thing in 70 years. And so the questions are going to be ongoing. Since the end of last week, our questions have increased as well to about 70. I think if we have a log of questions, whether that's just for the committee or whether it's a committee that's shared with the Cabinet, we log them all and we don't close them until the committee is happy that we have an answer for it. Those are the two recommendations. I'll shut up now.
You're muted, Councillor Garrett.
There, after all of that time, I've managed to forget to unmute myself, so I've been failed at the end. But what I was saying is, particularly on your second of your two recommendations, that's very much something that I think I put at the start of the meeting, that I want to get these collated, catalogued, curated, this log of questions, and make it a library, in a sense, a resource in which certainly the scrutiny function can go to and know that we've captured questions, answered them, and got comprehensive responses. But I think something that builds more broadly across the whole council function would be great if Cabinet were willing to go down that route with us. So we have 4 recommendations before us. Are there any of my colleagues who would wish to take those recommendations individually? I think these effectively cover both of the two papers, the response and the recovery paper. If we are able to take them on block, that would make the voting simpler. But colleagues, if there's any of you who would object to taking them on block, please indicate now, noting of course that Councillor Lilly in the sidebar, that for the benefit of the public, has noted that Appendix G has excellent recommendations and highlights items 9 and 14. Councillor Quirk, you would like to comment?
I don't have any objection to taking them as a block, but we only know what one of them actually is. 3 of them are just very vague assertions. I think we need to have some wording that we're agreeing.
So I'll ask Mr. Thistlewood if he's in a position to do his magic in terms of refining those recommendations. Or
yes, but I'm still unsure about the third one of Michael Merwell.
So the third one of the first one of Michael Merwell's one, as I understand it, that we recommend that. Oh well, actually, I'll come back to Councillor Merwell. It's probably easier that he restates that recommendation. Councillor Merwell, can I ask you to restate the first of your 2 recommendations around the living document? I think Councillor Merwell, you may be having a problem there again. He is. So, Councillor Quirk, you were unsure of a couple of the other recommendations. Could you just highlight for me for that?
I understood what they were when they were said, but if we're going to vote on something, we should actually know what we're voting on and what's going to be recorded that we voted on.
So, Mr. Thistlewood, you would want, shall I get Councillor Lee to restate his? You've got that, yes. Yeah. Councillor Andre's recommendation, as I understand it, is that the Cabinet gives consideration to including in its letter to the island's residents a survey, possibly online only, but ideally with both an online and postal approach to engaging the public in the priorities for the recovery. Mr. Metcalfe, you asked to come in, so I'll take you at that moment.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the recommendations, and of course happy to go with whatever you decide and take them on to Cabinet. The question that I would ask the members to perhaps think about is to what end the list of questions and answers. So how would you propose to use that perhaps next time you come back to the Scrutiny Committee, because I think that very much helps us in terms of how we put them together. So rather than just a simple log of questions and answers that may sit on the shelf, I think it goes back to Councillor Merwell's point earlier about what we're going to use them for and how we're going to take the lessons from them.
That's an extremely important point, Chief Executive, and you've always reminded me as Chair that we should always have a hypothesis that we're seeking to answer. I wonder if I might say that that's something that can be, that the recommendations wouldn't stop us from refining that outside of the meeting. I'm aware of attempting to refine things by committee in a virtual environment may be quite difficult. So I think we can make sure we refine that. I think that the thoughts are certainly there, but I'd be keen to make sure that we are able to give sufficient sort of thought informally as a committee to make sure that we can then transmit that through to you, Chief Executive, so that you know exactly what we're looking at, and indeed the Cabinet as well. Mr. Thistlewood, do you feel that you have captured the wording of the? So Mr. Thistlewood is just setting down some words to fully capture Michael Merwell's, unless he is capable of unmuting. here we are. So we have something in our chat bar. So the members of the public, again, we have that Councillor Merwell is recommending a living document that lists all the lessons learned, both positive and negative, including what happened and how they were resolved. Does everybody feel that they now understand what the 4 recommendations before us are, or needs further clarification? I'm not seeing anybody who feels that they do not. Yeah. Otherwise, I will ask Mr. Thistlewood now to just speak us through the 4 recommendations, and we'll take a vote.
Right, Chairman, it's Paul Thistlewood, Scrutiny Officer. So firstly, with Councillor Lilly's recommendation, we recommend to Cabinet that the health and well-being of the island residents has to be the Council's priority, and residents are actively engaged into the development of the recovery of the island the way they wish to see the future. We need to honour the community spirit that has been exceptional on the island and maintain it. The second recommendation from Councillor Andre was that we recommend that as part of the update letter to all residents, an invitation be included to participate in an online survey to identify priorities for recovery. Then we've got Councillor Merwell on a living document that lists all the lessons learnt, be they positive or negative, what happened and how they were resolved be maintained, and that a log of questions be maintained and regularly updated and reported to this committee.
I muted myself. Thank you, Mr. Thistlewood. Does anybody wish to just clarify anything further? Councillor Merwell has clarified his second question. There's a list of recommendation, list of questions from the committee that are answered in detail by the officers, and each question is signed off by Chair and the Cabinet in some way. Are you colleagues? I am slightly aware of the time as well, and we do still have one other agenda item to cover. Are you sufficiently content that we might move to a vote on these recommendations? I'm seeing general nods on my screen and thumbs up. I think that's great. So we have to individually go round, all of us, and voice our whether we are for or against or abstaining on the recommendation. Do you lead that? Or? Okay. So I'm going to make sure. So if I can make sure. So Councillor Andre.
In favour, Chair.
In favour. So I'm reading off my screen here. Councillor Lilly. I think you're muted at the moment, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Quirk was Councillor Lilly.
In favour, sorry.
Oh, okay. So Councillor Quirk.
In favour.
Councillor Hollis. You're muted, Councillor Hollis.
Am I there yet?
Councillor Hollis, yes.
I thought we had 4 recommendations.
We do, and we're taking them on block.
We're taking them on block?
On block, yes.
Okay, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Merwell?
Yes, I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Churchman?
I'm in favour.
Councillor Kennett?
I'm in favour.
Have I missed anybody? Councillor Tyndall is no longer present, so it's myself, and I am in favour of those recommendations. Thank you, colleagues, for what was a very wide-ranging discussion of these issues. And of course, what I would emphasise this is not the only time that we will be covering these issues. We are into a marathon of scrutiny across all 4 of the committees that carry out the scrutiny function, plus of course audit, which carries out a complementary function under Councillor Tyndall's chairmanship. that will continue for obviously for as long as we need to, and that looks like something like 12 to 18 months until we are through all of this terrible situation. We now have one remaining item on the cabinet agenda, which is to comment upon the public health strategy that they are considering. We have, before I move us on, Councillor Lilly, you've got an extra recommendation on the recovery paper.
I just wanted to say that John Metcalf asked us as a committee a specific question about what we would do with all the questions. We would obviously like a answer to all the questions that we've put forward, and these are important to come back to a future meeting. But I do, in answer to him, I personally feel that it comes under what Councillor Merwell has said, that this is a living document, and we do need to be able to show the community that we are asking detailed questions, and that they know that we've asked a huge amount of questions that can't be discussed tonight, but they are there on the record, and I think it is important that we have that. My recommendation I wish to do was to do with the recovery. You said response and then recovery, was in the light that we recommend that the Cabinet does come back to corporate scrutiny at his next meeting with its view and plans in regard a second wave, a strategy for second wave financially and health and financially within that. I think we do need to clearly put a recommendation regarding second wave.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Does anybody wish to speak to that recommendation? Councillor Hollis, I believe you're indicating.
Yes, I don't think you actually need that, because if a cabinet's going to do that anyway, if there's a second wave, they'll do that anyway. And we've already been told, we've been talking about it. So I don't think that's actually necessary. And I just think I would just go with the recommendation in the paper, which is 66, recommendation 66 and 67. If that's the correct one. That's it. I don't think one needs to complicate that. It's a bit like that. I think Councillor Lilly's recommendation is a bit like saying, ask them to do their job, which they're going to do anyway.
Thank you. Obviously, the recommendations in the paper are for Cabinet, so with slight difference of emphasis from our committee. Councillor Andre and then Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just in brief, Councillor Lilly mentioned financial. I'd like to replace financial with economic, because I think economic actually broadens it out. But I do agree with Councillor Lilly that we do need to highlight specifically a strategy in the case of a second wave.
And Councillor Quirk.
I think it's incumbent upon the Cabinet to do this anyway without us requesting them to do so. But a lot of senior scientific opinion actually doesn't believe in the second wave. This is something that's largely invented by journalists.
So I think there is scope for reinforcing the view that the Cabinet's recovery plan puts forward around the second wave. I actually understand completely what Councillor Hollis is saying, that it's kind of implicit in that. I think it's one of these cases where the committee reinforces a view that the public would have of us, that we're just reinforcing something that should be there. Whether or not there's a second wave or a second outbreak, there's kind of a lot of debate around that, and I understand Councillor Quirk and I probably read many of the same sort of literature around these things. I will put that. I've noted a remark from the Chief Executive that the item was closed. I'm going to exercise my privilege to say that it depended upon when I saw something in the chat bar. I think it's important that we exercise a little latitude around this, particularly as we're conducting things in very different circumstances. So there is a recommendation before us as amended. Do you accept the amendment that Councillor Andre would put forward as well, Councillor Lilly?
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Thistlewood, could you repeat what you now feel is the recommendation? As
I believe, Chairman, members are requesting that the Cabinet reports to the next meeting on strategies and plans to deal with a second wave, including the health and economic aspects.
Thank you for that, Mr. Thistlewood. I will take that to a vote in the same way as we've just had before. So I will. Does everybody understand the recommendation as it's put? And yes. So I will take the vote again. Councillor Andre.
For, Chair.
Councillor Lilly.
For.
Councillor Quirk.
Against.
Councillor Churchman. You are muted.
Still muted.
Yes, Councillor Churchman, you're still muted. I'll take Councillor Merwell's vote and then come back to Councillor Churchman.
In favour.
In favour. Councillor Hollis.
Against.
Councillor Kennett.
In favour.
Councillor Churchman.
Against.
Against. My own vote is in favour. So I have that's 5 votes in favour and 3 votes against. So the committee does make that recommendation. Thank you very much, colleagues. Can we now move to the public health strategy paper and the discussion on that? I'll work through you. This is a cabinet paper, so Leader of the Council, do you wish to introduce this paper? But you may, of course, want to pass it to your colleague, Councillor Mosdale.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is actually prepared by both Councillor Mosdale and the Director, Simon Bryant. It's a very comprehensive document which we'll be considering. I'm very happy for Councillor Mosdale to comment on it. And also, I think it will be useful to hear from the Director of Public Health, who has sat behind it. So provided those two are still with us at this hour, I'll pass over to them.
So I'll take Councillor Mosdale and then Mr. Bryant.
I apologise for this. My puppy has gone to sleep on my lap while you've all been talking. So, I do apologise for that. I'm happy to take any questions. I did want to pass over to Simon Bryant. That's the reason he's on this call, on this meeting, so he can do a brief introduction as well. I know that they have worked really, really hard on this public health strategy. I've seen some of the questions that Councillor Lilly has emailed today, and we have prepared and discussed the answers to those questions, which I'm quite happy with the answers that Simon Bryant is prepared to give. If you want to hand over to Simon Bryant.
I'll mute myself. Mr. Bryant.
Many thanks, Chair. If I just quickly go through the paper. So this has been started for some time and COVID disrupted it rather than it being a result of COVID. So the current health and social care system focuses on illness rather than keeping people healthy. So having a public health strategy enables the council, and this is the council's public health strategy, to focus on keeping people healthy and think about all that the council does to promote health and well-being. Because we know we have a change in population and demand for services rising, and we need to move to a wellness model. And this strategy sets out some of the key things we need to do to build on our own strengths and assets to ensure people are able to make positive health changes to improve their own health. However, it does come at a time of a public health emergency, and therefore promoting and protecting health of the population is right up in the fore of people's minds. The strategy will span 5 years up to 2025 over 5 priority areas. These are a good start in life, physical well-being, mental well-being, healthy places, and protecting ourselves from harms. That might be a health protection incident or something similar. This is really helping us set out our key objectives for the council, and that will enable us to work really clearly with our partners to support them to play their part to ensure that public health is everyone's business. Within the strategy, there are a number of key areas which across the chapters, and we've set out what we want to achieve, how we'll do it, and how we'll measure those. And we've certainly set out some kind of numerical measures. Obviously, there's much more to measuring a strategy than that, and we'll work through working with communities to understand their views and gain their input, because it's really important this means something to the communities. And finally, I'd just like to say that this is about tackling inequalities as well. We know that some communities experience health outcomes differently to others, and therefore throughout all these key areas we'll be focusing on those who need the most support or facilitation or help to improve their health. So that's key throughout the document. I'm very happy to stop there. I have got Councillor Lee's questions, which I can answer in due course, but I'll pause there in the initial point.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. First question is from Councillor Quirk.
Thank you very much. In the Appendix 1 on health behaviours and the negative effect that they have, we seem to completely ignore scheduled drugs. Heroin almost always shortens the life expectancy of the takers. The cannabis has psychiatric effects, particularly in some subgroups of the population, and crack cocaine increases violence and criminality. I would have thought that should be in there.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk.
May I come back in?
Mr. Bryant. I'll take Mr. Bryant then. I think this is probably a best way to take it.
Absolutely agree with Councillor Quirk, and substance use is within the strategy there, and we are both preventing young people from taking up drugs to supporting people who are having problems and misusing drugs and alcohol, and providing recovery for those who are through that process to enable them to live full lives. So absolutely, it's key, and it is part of the strategy, and we are key that's a key area to work on.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bryant. I've got Councillor Churchman, and then Councillor Andre.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can indeed hear you, Councillor Churchman.
Yes. On page B7, a public health strategy where it lists lots of things, the one item I cannot see anywhere is food. We are what we eat, but nowhere is there mention of food, the quality of food, and fresh fruit and veg. Why, please? Thank you.
So shall I ask Mr. Bryant here first?
Many thanks, Councillor. Absolutely, it's connected with a number of things there. So we are thinking about the being a healthy weight is absolutely key for that, and we've got in healthy places a food environment. And it's throughout in different places, but a healthy weight is absolutely key, and food and physical activity are part of that kind of that agenda, so that they are throughout there, just probably worded slightly differently than you were looking for.
May I come back?
Yes, you may indeed. Yes, supplementary to that.
Healthy weight. Well, of course, what you often do get is fast and then overfeed. So I'm sorry, I don't think that is descriptive enough. To me, healthy eating in my book is 3 meals a day, with certainly a fair sprinkling of fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. And I'm afraid in this day and age, if you don't tell people this, they end up down at McDonald's for at least 2 meals a day. Thank you.
Sorry, can
bear with me. I will take Councillor Mosdell.
Can I just remind everybody, and it's one of the discussions that Simon and I have had repeatedly over the months, this is a public health strategy. There will be lots of parts of what public health do that are under this whole strategy. We can't have one part of a public health strategy that tells people what they need to eat, when they need to eat, what time they need to eat, how they need to chew it. We need to be really careful that we realise that this is a strategy. When you read the strategy, there is those golden threads throughout it of what obesity does, how you should have healthy eating. It's all part of that strategy. I think we can get very fixated when we read the strategy and think, well, this is my pet project. Councillor Nicholson was here. We all know he'd be talking about gut antibodies and stuff like that. And why isn't there a whole paragraph about that? We need to remember this is a strategy. I personally feel the strategy reads well, but when we're directing questions to Simon Bryant, can we ensure that we're not asking for very specifics, because those are our pet feeling at the time. Remember, it is an overriding public health strategy.
So thank you, Councillor Mosdell. What I'm also aware of course, is in the normal run of things, this strategy would have been discussed, this draft strategy would have been discussed at the Policy and Scrutiny Committee prior to it making it to Cabinet. So and that it will of course go to that Policy and Scrutiny Committee. I know post its potential adoption at Cabinet, but that's where to explore the detail, in particular detail. Councillor Andre, you have a question, and then Councillor Lilly.
Right, finally there, unmuted. Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate Councillor Mosdell's point that this is a public health strategy, and that we are in very unusual times, and were we not, but we need to look at it almost in isolation. But on the other hand, I noticed that the COVID-19 pandemic is mentioned on page B15 of the paper, but only in respect of preparing and responding to emergencies. And she also mentioned golden threads, and I very much agree. I think we might be missing a bit of a trick here. I appreciate that this is a public health strategy. I think, am I right in saying for up to 2025, but it's certainly an ongoing strategy. And what I would like to see is that a lot of people's habits have changed because of the pandemic. And I think if we can somehow harness that messaging through our public health strategy to try and encourage, for example, a lot of people are cycling more at the moment. And I think if we can actually engage those and promote the messaging for our public health strategy through things that are currently happening that are likely to dissipate once we actually go through the recovery phase, then I think that will be a very, very valuable exercise.
Councillor Mosdell, do you want to pick up on those points, or is it Mr. Bryant?
Simon wants to respond to that.
So Mr. Bryant then.
And Chief Executive would like to come in. Absolutely, I agree with Councillor Andre that we've seen some change in habits, and I was chairing a regional meeting today looking at that, and all the things we're talking about, increasing cycling and walking. How do we use the positives of COVID to improve public health in the round? Not just about promoting, but actually changing some of the ways that we live and move forward. And it's key. And COVID has provided some real opportunities there. And just because COVID is in that box at the back, that's actually managing the pandemic, but there's so many other implications that we need to think about from a public health perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. The Chief Executive, you wanted to comment, and then I will move on to final two questions.
Yes,
Thank you, Chairman. I think I just wanted to reinforce the point from the Director of Public Health. I think where we've got to is we've got a public health strategy that was largely drafted pre-COVID. So it was dealing with lots of our public health issues that we'd identified at the time. Again, identifying the key issues, not necessarily the detailed plans for how we're going to deal with them, but getting our outcomes agreed that we can then work towards. COVID has, of course, come along, and we do need to respond to COVID and the implications for our community. But I think we've got a number of things that are running parallel that will help us deal with the COVID thing. So I don't think we need to hold up the agreement to the public health strategy whilst we deal with COVID. So our recovery strategy will naturally need to be about how do we help improve people's health and well-being through the COVID crisis, and then beyond the crisis. Our outbreak plans will be all about that as well. So I think we've got lots of things running in parallel that, you know, in 18 months' time, I've got no doubt we'll refresh our public health strategy in the light of the lessons learned from COVID and all the work that we've done. But the very fact that the the Director of Public Health, is at the centre of the recovery plan, the outbreak plan, the strategy plan, I think that puts us in a really, really strong position. I can honestly say that in all my time in local government, this is the COVID crisis, if you like, has put public health right at the centre of people's thinking and right at the centre of what we need to do. And therefore, we need to capitalise on that through all of our planning processes. And it's not just about the public health strategy.
So, Councillor Andre, a quick supplementary. What I will say, colleagues, is that this meeting times out after a 3-hour limit, so we will need to bring ourselves to a conclusion very, very soon. So, Councillor Andre's supplementary, and then there'll be Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just very briefly on that point. I'm not looking to delay the public health strategy, and what Simon Bryant has actually said has reassured me. It's good to know that there are things running in parallel, but what I don't want to do is I think we have a real opportunity to reinforce those messages now, because it's likely that people will revert to perhaps old behaviours. So it's not that I want to delay the public health strategy, and it's good to know that there are things running in parallel. But I think we need to be reinforcing those messages now in order to make sure that people do take up and sustain those lifestyle changes, which will ultimately benefit, you know, everyone's health. Thank you.
I think that was a commentary there, so I'll take Councillor Lilly and then Councillor Kennett. But do bear in mind, members, that we will time out in about 8 minutes' time.
Taking in mind the time, I'm happy to for my questions to come back in writing. I wanted to highlight, because I consulted Health Watch, and so my 5 particular points have come in consultation with health groups and Health Watch. And it was just to say that housing perhaps needs to be stronger, especially, I think, from lessons learned from COVID. There was no mention of dementia, which I think in our demographic is important. There needs to be more qualitative data within it. And also the issue of suicide has to come up, and that links really with the mental health is going to have to become a priority in mental health. I know it is now.
Sorry.
And also the health inequalities. So I'm happy to get answers. I would just like those views that have come from consultation with Health Watch are actually taken on board. Thank you.
So I'm sure those views will be taken on board. I don't want to open up, with time pressing, a debate across the ether on that. Councillor Kennett, did you have a question? Do you?
I was just reflecting, actually, when Mr. Bryant was talking about policy, about something the leader said earlier in this meeting. And what he said was, he's got an opportunity now with planning and green spaces, and thinking about the blue and green policy that we've talked about a lot in public health. do you think we can, and the push on walking and cycling, do you think we can really work between directorates there to bring that off? Because I think we've got an opportunity now. We've got people really thinking about it, and we've got a planning position whereby we're really looking to open spaces and how we do that. And I just felt it'd be good if we could really link those two for the benefit of the public, and if that's possible.
Councillor Ostell, or would it mean Mr. Bryant, just to comment back on that?
Could I just comment and say that, you know, we've taken on board all of Councillor Lilly's questions. We're taking on board what due to the pressing time. If anybody wants to direct questions to us, I can ensure that when I give my speech to Public Health Strategy on Thursday, that when I give that those questions are answered at that time as well, because we are limited now on time. I know the answers, and so does Simon, because we've discussed them today, and we've got a good answer for Jill, but actually the minutes are counting down as we speak, aren't they?
Indeed, I'm aware of that, Councillor. So I will move to Councillor Hollis, who and you may be doing the same for Councillor Hollis. So Councillor Hollis.
Yes, it was just to add, if there's something to encourage sport and competitive sport in schools, because physical education doesn't start when you leave.
And I see nods and smiles to that as well, Councillor Hollis. Colleagues, if I can wrap this one up, what I'm hearing from you all is a general feeling that the Cabinet should proceed with adopting this strategy. Obviously, there are a number of areas where we have each individually a particular view that something is not quite covered properly, or more so. I acutely aware of the time. So, for example, in my case, Councillor Mosdale, you will have seen my question about the dementia and just bringing that in. Councillor Jones-Evans, I can take you for one quick question, and then I'm going to move to a recommendation because I don't want to time out on this meeting. So, Councillor Jones-Evans.
Very kind of you, Chair. I was actually just going to put it in writing, but as I've written it up here, I just wanted to ask Simon about 20-mile-per-hour limits in residential roads, around schools and town and village centres. That's a big public health issue, and it doesn't have to answer now, but I just want to put it out there because it's a major issue, and I know that other directors of public health around the country are very supportive of this, as is the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jones-Evans. I have Councillor Quirk would wish to put a proposal, if you would put that for us, Councillor Quirk.
I would like to propose that we note and support the public health strategy.
Would that have a seconder? Has a seconder from Councillor Hollis. In fact, I'm seeing hands all over the place, and I think implicit within that, of course, is that the committee under the chairmanship of Councillor Nicholson will be, I'm sure, scrutinising that at its next meeting. And of course, I remind us that all of us can scrutinise not just through these committees, but through the other committees and through our own individual efforts. I will, in the usual way, take a vote on that. So it has been proposed in a second that we note and support. Councillor Andre.
For, Chair.
Councillor Lilly.
For.
Councillor Quirk.
For.
Councillor Hollis.
For.
Councillor Churchman.
For.
Councillor Merwill.
For.
Councillor Kennett.
For.
And for myself, my vote is for this, so that recommendation is passed. That brings us to the final item on our agenda. So it is a slimmed down agenda. I'm advised there are no written members' questions. So I would also note that normally we would have discussions around the forward plan and other matters. We're not able to take those today, partly because now time is about to time out. Can I thank every one of you for engaging in such a sensitive way around the issues that we've discussed. We're all acutely aware of the situation that we're still within the middle of. Can I thank all those other members who watched in, even if they weren't called to participate. Particularly can I thank all the officers who have been there as well, and the democratic staff who supported me brilliantly, even though I dropped out from time to time. There's much to learn from this process, but I think we have conducted some sensible business, and I hope that you keep all safe and well. And any member of the public who has made it to the end of this meeting, thank you for being with us as well. Do keep safe, do keep well. Your council is going to be doing its best to keep you safe and well. And I will close the meeting.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.